Arts Rotary Festival. It gives me huge pleasure to introduce Dr. Sailesh Rao, who is the founder of Climate Healers. This is a US not-for-profit organisation dedicated to healing the earth. He believes that greenhouse gas emissions from animal agriculture is largely being ignored, and that there should be a switch from a Planet A mindset, which preserves civilization, to a Planet B mindset, which restores life as we knew it. Rao is the author of 5 books: Carbon Dharma, Carbon Yoga, Animal Agriculture is Immortal, Pinky Promise, and his most recent book, There is a Planet B. So Rao will talk for about 45 minutes, more or less, and then be happy to answer questions for the last 15 minutes. And then the session will finish on the hour. And at the conclusion of his talk, he'll be very happy to sign copies of his book, which the representative from Blackwell's will lead you to the pop-up book stand, which is not in this hall. A very warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Anne. This reminds me of my days working on the internet back in the 90s, when the fastest speed was 100 megabits per second. And people ask me, 100 megabits per second, we are having trouble getting it to work. You're a systems engineer. Can you look at it and tell us what we should be doing something differently? And I looked at it and I told them, you can actually do 1 billion bits per second on that cable, a gigabit per second. But you're not doing it right. This is why you're having trouble making 100 megabit work. I said, oh, come on. I said, well, you have to go from analog to digital. That's how you'll get the speed up. I said, we'll believe it when we see it. What is this digital signal processing for the internet? So, but they let me play. And within 7 years, gigabit Ethernet was on every motherboard. And the internet just took off. Until then, the internet was something that nobody knew what it was. By 2003, I overheard someone say, I cannot live without the internet. It had become so common. So I'm facing the same situation here. Because in 2015, I presented a paper at the American Geophysical Union fall meeting. This is the largest gathering of climate scientists in the world. So I had worked with this professor from the University of Illinois, Atul Jain, and his student, C.G. Shu. And he presented a paper saying that if the world goes vegan and we restore forests on the land that gets freed up from animal agriculture, on just 41% of the land that's being used for grazing today, if the forests are restored as they used to be in 1800, we can reverse climate change. We can suck down all the carbon, excess carbon that we have added to the atmosphere since 1750. Now, over 100 climate scientists came to talk to me during that time, during that presentation, and they said, you're right, but it'll never happen. And I said, aha, I've heard this before. The last time I heard it, it happened. It happened in 7 years. So now I'm convinced the same thing is happening now. People are trying to ignore the cow in the room. They're trying to pretend that this has nothing to do with climate change. But in reality, if the world goes vegan, we can literally reverse climate change. That's my claim. And that's why I wrote this book. This book is called There is a Planet B. What I mean by that is that there is a way we can move away from a Planet A mindset, where we ignore the cow in the room, to a Planet B mindset, where we put everything on the table and understand how do we solve the problem. And when we do that, we can solve our problems. So it's looking at the world upside down. We're not used to doing this. Okay? On Planet A, there are 4 foundational myths that we have built our entire civilization on. A myth is a lie wrapped in a truth. And throughout academia, throughout the world, these myths are being taught to children and to students. So we have an education system that's churning out people who believe the wrong things. And as a result, we have built a world that is not sustainable. Ultimately, the education system is at the root of our problems, because the education system is creating the people who build the world. And if the world that you've built is not sustainable, then there is something wrong with the education system. Because is it possible that humans can never live without destroying the planet? Or is it possible that we can live in a way in which we enhance the planet with every action that we take? That's the Planet B mindset. So what are these 4 foundational myths, and how do we correct them to create the 4 foundational truths on Planet B? The 4 foundational myths, there are plenty of them, by the way. I've just identified the 4 core myths. First myth is protein is only found in animal foods. This is a myth that's taught to children in science textbooks. As I said, it's a lie wrapped in a truth. So the way you create this myth is that you tell children protein and meat. Protein is meat. You associate protein with meat. And pretty soon everyone begins to think this protein is only found in meat, or only found in animal foods. On Planet B, the reality is protein is found in all plant foods. All plant foods have complete protein. How do we know that? Because there is a database of over 11,000 plant foods which the University of Minnesota has analyzed in a laboratory, and they've identified all 20 amino acids in all plant foods. So that's the truth. The data is telling us that protein is found in plants. And we know that this is true because we see elephants eating just plants and growing so big. How did they do that? If the plants don't have protein. So that's the first myth that has to be turned into the truth. The truth is all plants have complete protein. The second myth is that calcium is only found in dairy foods. Again, it's a lie wrapped in a truth, because they just tell you, if you want calcium, drink milk or have dairy foods. And pretty soon people think calcium is only found in dairy foods. But in reality, Dr. McDougall pointed out to me that if you eat a natural diet, and if you eat enough calories, you will get enough calcium. You don't have to worry about it at all. It's as simple as that. How do we know that? Again, analyze it in the lab and you will see that there is calcium in every plant food. How does the cow get its calcium? Besides, who said milk is good food for human beings? Milk, cow's milk, is the lactation secretions of a mammal who's 5 times our size. And it's designed to make her baby grow from calf to cow in 18 months. And we have to grow from baby to adult in 18 years. And we are 1/5 the size of the cow. So that milk is designed to make our body grow 50 to 60 times faster than it ever needs to grow. It's highly inflammatory. And this is why most people around the world are lactose intolerant. All it means is it's not the proper food for human beings. And yet, we are convincing people to consume dairy on a daily basis. We give it to our children in schools. Why is that? Because when we consume dairy on a daily basis, we are paying for the cow's upkeep on a daily basis. And then when the cow is finished, she becomes cheap beef. So the only way McDonald's and Burger King can source their cheap burgers is if there are plenty of dairy consumers. So dairy is the foundation of this system on planet A. So the third myth is that human well-being necessitates endless economic growth. So we take that as a given. We are taught that this is the way it's going to be. This is the way it's supposed to be. And it's a myth. Because I looked at, what are the goals of our civilization? So there are now 17 sustainable development goals. And if you look at all these goals, no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, and so on, they're all good goals that we should be aspiring to meet. And then they stuck in goal number 8, economic growth. And you ask yourself, if you meet no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, and so on, do you care that the economy is growing? Why is that in there? So in any system, if you're given a redundant goal, the first thing I do as a systems engineer is to throw it out. Because that redundant goal is going to distract my work. And then I ask, can we meet no poverty? Can we meet zero hunger? Yes, we can. We are extracting 6 times as much food as we need from the planet. Surely we know how to feed 8 billion people when we have 6 times as much food as we need from the planet. The only reason we are not doing it is because we have convinced people that they have to eat meat to get protein. They have to consume dairy to get calcium. And so people are consuming meat and dairy and causing hunger at the bottom. Literally, we are feeding our animals first before we feed our fellow human beings. That's why there is hunger. So what is the correct truth, foundational truth on planet B? The correct foundational truth is that human well-being necessitates a sense of purpose. And now we have a sense of purpose because there is a fire on our planet. If we don't get a sense of purpose today, now, I don't know when we will get one. I had a fire in my home, and I wrote about it in my book. And when the fire was started, I had no idea it had started. I was making coffee. That's what I do early in the morning, make coffee for myself. And my children came running out and said, "Dad, there is smoke coming out of the vents." And I told them, "Oh, the heater just came on. It's a new house. Don't worry about it." Because I was busy making coffee and I was on the phone with a colleague of mine, talking about making the internet go faster. They came running out a few minutes later saying, "Dad, there is black smoke coming out of the vents." And this time I paid attention because my phone went dead. And ran downstairs to the garage, opened the door, and the car was spitting flames at me. And at that point, the only thought in my mind was, how do I save my children? I wasn't interested in making coffee anymore. I wasn't interested in talking to my colleague anymore. All my normal routines went out the window because there was a fire in my home. Today, we know that there is a fire on our planet. In 2009, the Stockholm Resilience Center identified 9 planetary boundaries for the life support systems of the planet. And they said that humans have crossed 3 of them. And in 2015, they said we have crossed 4 of them. And in 2023, they said we have crossed 6 of them. It's like a 3-alarm fire that became a 4-alarm fire and a 6-alarm fire in 2023. And I just heard that we have crossed the 7th one. If we don't wake up now and start doing something that's going to solve the problem, I don't know when we will. The way to solve the problem is to address the cow in the room. Take it seriously. Our normal routines are out the window. We have to now figure out how to solve the problem so that we and all life on earth can thrive. So that's the third foundation. The foundational myth turned into a truth. From planet A to planet B. And the final foundational myth on planet A is that fossil fuels are the leading cause of climate change. And I say BS. It's absolutely not true. In fact, my latest calculations are showing that fossil fuel burning has caused as much cooling as it has caused heating on the planet. And therefore, the net effect of all the fossil fuel burning that we have done from 1750 to 2020 is 2% of the heating that we have caused on the planet. 66% came from animal agriculture. 15% came from forestry. And then waste and so on, or the rest. So literally, if we eliminate fossil fuel burning today, we will see the heating on the planet increase from 2.6 watts per square meter to 4.9 watts per square meter. Is that what we are trying to do? Are we trying to heat ourselves up? But that's exactly what all our governments are talking about. Because they're desperately trying to ignore the cow in the room. So the best way to address climate change and all of the planetary boundary transgressions is to first eliminate animal agriculture as quickly as possible. This is an emergency, folks. Okay? You have to address it as quickly as possible, shut it down, and as the forests suck up the CO2 from the atmosphere, then you can slowly dial down the fossil fuel engine. It's not that fossil fuels haven't caused warming gases to be issued into the atmosphere. They have. But they have sent just as much cooling gases into the atmosphere as warming gases. So the effect is that the cooling gases have completely nulled the warming from the fossil fuel emissions. But the warming gases stay in the atmosphere for decades, whereas the cooling gases stay in the atmosphere for a few weeks. Which is why if you wave a magic wand and convert the entire energy infrastructure from fossil fuels to clean energy, within a few weeks, the heating on the planet will go up from 2.6 watts to 4.9 watts per square meter. And we'll be in big, big trouble if we did that. So, on planet B, animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change. Like on the cover of the book, we have it's a riff on an ad from Patagonia. It says, animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change, and we don't believe anyone who says rapidly phasing down fossil fuel use should be a top priority. Because the reality is, we have been misled by the UN IPCC. So don't tell us that we have run out of solutions. On planet A, we have been reading this from the bottom up. When you read this from the bottom up, it says, we have run out of solutions. So don't tell us that we have been misled by the UN IPCC. Because the reality is, rapidly phasing down fossil fuel use should be a top priority. And we don't believe anyone who says animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change. That's what we've been doing on planet A. So how is it that the UN IPCC has been misleading us? First of all, what is the UN IPCC? It is the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So it's a panel formed by government officials to compile the science, the climate science, that then all nations use to make policies on climate change. Now, in my experience as an engineer, you should never let politicians twiddle with the science. You don't get good science out of that. You cannot solve problems using science like that. But that's exactly what we have allowed the UN to do. The governmental officials have veto power on what gets written in the IPCC climate reports. So they are vetoing any mention of the cow in the room. Last time for the sixth assessment report, the scientists had recommended a transition to a plant-based diet for the whole world. And the governments of Brazil and Argentina vetoed it and changed it. So how are we ever going to get good science out of that? In fact, there are 4 ways in which the UN IPCC has been misleading us or politicizing the emissions accounting. First, they have been undercounting methane emissions by a factor of 3. How do we know they have been undercounting it by a factor of 3? Well, they use something called the global warming potential 100 for counting the impact of other gases and relating it to CO2, the carbon dioxide, the main gas. And when they do that, they're averaging the impact of methane over 100 years. But methane is a gas that only stays in the atmosphere for 8 years. Then it becomes CO2. So for most of the time, it's being counted as CO2. And when it's methane, it's extremely powerful as a greenhouse gas. So you have averaged it out for 100 years, over 100 years, and made it look like it's less effective than it really is. The other way that you can do the same thing, you can compare the gases, is by looking at how much has the methane increased in the atmosphere from 1750 to 2020. How much has the CO2 increased from 1750 to 2020? And then look at how much that increase in CO2 and the increase in methane has caused in terms of heating. And we can do that because we know how much it's increased and we can then calculate how much heating it has caused. When you do that, you'll see that methane has been undercounted by a factor of 3. So it's their own data. I'm taking their own data and saying, your own data is telling me that methane has been undercounted by a factor of 3. The second is they're underestimating the deforestation emissions by a factor of 3. How do they do that? When you deforest land, you get credit for any land that you have abandoned over here. Or on any land, on any managed land, if you're bringing back trees, you get credit for that. So essentially what they're saying is that deforestation that's happened here has been selectively sequestered by managed land over here. But in reality, that's not how it happens. All the emissions go up into the atmosphere and the trees pick up the CO2 from the atmosphere after it's all been mixed up. There is no sentry saying, you're a CO2 that came from fossil fuels, so get away. I only want CO2 that came from deforestation. But that's how they're accounting. And when you start accounting correctly, we realize that deforestation emissions have been undercounted by a factor of 3. Third, when they tell you that fossil fuels are the leading cause of climate change, they are completely ignoring all the cooling emissions. It's like saying, here are these gases, just look at the impact of those. These other gases, don't look at them. And when you count the cooling gases, they're actually completely offset the warming gases. This is why I say fossil fuels have only caused 2% of the heating, whereas animal agriculture has caused 66% of the heating on the planet. And finally, they are ignoring the opportunity cost of all the land that's being used for animal agriculture. 43% of the land area of the planet is being used to get just 12% of the food we eat in terms of total weight. 85% of the food we eat is already coming from plant sources worldwide. And 3% comes from the ocean. for which we are using the entire ocean. We are in fact bottom trawling an area the size of South America every year to get that 3% of the food we eat. The only way we can do this economically is because this is being subsidized by governments. Why would governments subsidize this activity that is clearly destroying the planet? Why would they do that? And I was trying to understand that. And I want to give you an example of what happens. I was in a village in Orissa, in India, and I was talking to these villagers, and the villagers had just been approached by a middleman who wanted them to grow vegetables to be sold in the cities. And the middleman had this criteria. The vegetables should not have any wormholes in them. They should be clean, no unusual vegetables, so you have to pick them all out. And then he gave them a series of instructions as to how to grow those vegetables. They had to pour pesticides, prevent worms from eating the vegetables. And these villagers were puzzled. So they asked me, "You live in the city, right?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Why do people in the city want to eat vegetables that even the worms don't want to eat?" And I was stunned. I realized, we do this, right? We don't want to eat vegetables with the wormholes in them. And when we don't pick out the vegetables, we pick out the vegetables that don't have wormholes in them and put them in our shopping basket. We're sending a message to the middleman saying, "Don't bring any vegetables with wormholes in them." And the middleman says, "Why should I pick up those vegetables and transport them all the way that no one is going to eat?" So then he tries to convince the villagers to grow vegetables that don't have wormholes in them. And this is how we are unconsciously causing our food to be poisoned. Just by consumer actions, right? Consumer choices. In the same way, if a government says, "No more fish," there is hardly any fish left in the ocean, we vote them out. So the government is scared of us. And the government is saying, "How do I get fish into the market so that I remain in power?" And they're subsidizing it to the wazoo. And software engineers are trying to figure out where the last remaining fish are so that people can go and catch them. This is how we are participating in our own extinction. We're causing it to happen to ourselves. So on planet B, we have to put all this out on the table and ask, how do we solve our problem? And when we do that, we realize that the solution has already been worked on. Lots of people have been working on different aspects of this solution throughout the world. And all we have to do is to put it all together. So I have examples of all these different actions that have been going on and how do we solve the problem from an engineering perspective. And it's not that hard, folks. It's going to be very, very good for all of us and good for the animals and good for the planet. So I'm excited that we are in this transformational phase, and at the end of that, it looks like a beautiful world that we can create for all life. So this book is looking at the world upside down. This is why when you open the book like this, you'll actually read it upside down. This is the right way to read it. And Glenn Mercer's quote is there on the back. It says, "The world is not such a terrible place as long as you look at it wrong." So with that, I want to throw the floor open for questions. So let's have a dialogue, more of a dialogue than a monologue.
Thank you. I can't help noticing that there aren't that many people here. As you say, so convincingly, there is something that we can all do, and we can all do it now, and it's a joy. What do we do who are already doing that? How do we get people who are not listening to listen?
Oh, I think my personal way of thinking about this is there is so much work to be done in building the Planet B system. So we have to build a complete system for Planet B. So I talk about a completely different currency system we have to build. We have to build a food system in which everyone is fed healthy food for free. In fact, I tell Marlene is sitting here, that if people had access to her food, everybody would be vegan today. Okay? Because it's delicious food, you can make this healthy as well. So let's work on creating that infrastructure, and they will come. So I'd rather, instead of going and trying to beat our heads against the wall on those who are pretending there is no cow in the room, because the cow is being ignored in every classroom around the world. The cow is being ignored in every hall of government throughout the world. So when are we going to grow up and realize that we no longer need a cow, that we can live happily without using cows, without using animals for any purpose whatsoever? So let us build a system in which we don't have to use animals at all. And as we create this infrastructure, so I say a vegan world needs a vegan infrastructure, vegan institutions, a vegan constitution. So I have an example of a constitution in the book, and a vegan currency. And the vegan currency has to flow from the bottom up as opposed to from the top down. Because it's the currency system that's causing people to pretend that there is no cow in the room. They think they have an advantage. They've already won the game, It's a competitive game we're playing. And I say, the competitive games are not going to get us to a sustainable world. Sustainability is an infinite game. And so let's build that and then see what happens.
Is there an alternative to the IPCC, just in the sense that with all of the paid-for scientists and the obvious obfuscation that they're going through, is there some other paragon of truth out there that we can go to find out?
That's a good question. It turns out that the scientists who are working in the IPCC are trying to do their best. So they're trying to put their data in there. It's the summary for policymakers where all this tweaking happens. Because the policymakers only look at the summary for policymakers. They don't look at the data. And all I'm doing is looking at their data and saying, your own data is telling me that animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change. And so I say the truth is there. It's just we have to create a summary for citizens.
In the last few weeks, we've seen the trade very much in turmoil. Localism is becoming the agenda.
Right.
And I was just wondering if Trump is the savior we've been waiting for.
Unconsciously, maybe. I really believe that everything happens for the best. And we don't really realize what it is until we look back and then make sense of it. And perhaps he's creating turmoil and chaos when he's saying this system is no longer going to work. And is there a better way to live? So he's calling on all of us to figure this out. And there's a better way to live. We can live in a way that helps animals and helps human beings and helps the planet. And I think we need to adopt that. And I'm thinking that, imagine in response to all this, we make sure that every church, every temple, every synagogue, every mosque has free, healthy food for anyone who walks by and eats. That would end world hunger. Because there is a place of worship near almost everybody. And then let's get the community around there to make sure that this happens. That gets us, gives us a lot of work to do. And when we do that, I think the whole system will collapse. McDonald's won't have anyone coming in there, and it's already collapsing. So, yes.
Last year, I listened to Marley Bell talk, and I tasted vegan food for the first time. And so I decided that we have a place in France, and so I decided we'd get rid of the sheep on the grazing land and plant olive trees. So we've got 40 new olive trees that the pigs dug up in the first 6 months of being there, but they're still there. And that was fine, we could make changes that way. But my husband comes from Scotland, and he's, expects his meat on the plate, and that's the biggest change. I mean, I can give him vegan food, and he'll tolerate it for a day, and then we go back to something else. But I think that the biggest thing is actually changing tastes that have been developed over hundreds of years, and it's going to take more than education in the British world to do that.
Yes, it requires, something changed within you, when you ate Marlene's food.
Yes.
Something changed within you, and that allowed you to make these transformations happen. So your husband also has some trigger, some key you have to find that would help him change. Right? And we all have that. We all have that. Because I say, if you ask anyone, would you deliberately hurt an innocent animal unnecessarily? Everyone says no. I wouldn't do that. I said, well, in that case you're vegan. In your heart you're vegan. But who you are and what you do are not in alignment.
I think it's because we can't see what's happening. It just turns up on the plate, so it's so much easier to ignore the cow in the room.
Right. It's called concealment capitalism. So the corporations want concealment capitalism. They don't want you to know what they're doing to bring you the product that they're giving you. And simultaneously, they want surveillance capitalism for us. They want to know exactly what you're up to. So it's the opposite of the way it should be. On planet B, it will be the other way around. Right? We need privacy. They need to be transparent. So anyone who makes products for the community needs to show how they're doing it. Is that hard? Is that too much to ask?
Thank you very much for making me think that Trump might bring some good. That's what I call a glance at the full sort of value. But my concern is that we can't even get the Green Party to promote legalism.
Yeah.
I've been doing this work for 40 years of my life, and the people I think most struggle with are the animal groups that keep telling people that they can discharge their moral obligations to animals by eating crate-free pork or cage-free eggs or other sorts. Even Peter Singer talks about this whole idea of what I call happy exploitation, but this idea of welfare. This is the problem. The problem is whenever you start talking about a moral principle that you're going to take seriously, you're just, you have to get to the corporations that are trying to hide with you. We all know, and we've all known all of our lives, animals don't drop dead from old age. They're slaughtered. It's an ugly process. This is why when you go to a dinner party and someone starts talking about this, oh, I don't want to hear about this. I don't want to hear, it'll put me off my meal. So we all know what's going on. But it's troubling to me because you can't even get the Green Party to say, you've got to go vegan. You can't get the animal groups to say, there is no right way to do the wrong thing. So when you articulate your message or I articulate mine, it's perceived by people, well, they're extreme. And this is part of the problem. We're not just fighting the corporations that produce the garbage that we eat. It's not just them. It's the people who are sort of in the NGOs and all of these charities that are fighting, that are part of the problem.
Right.
And so it becomes, it's very difficult. And because we're trying to get a message out, and the message is, I spend half of my day, every day, dealing with people on Twitter or whatever saying, my arms and legs are going to fall off if I don't eat animals, because blah, 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 and not even these groups say that I have to go vegan, or whatever. It becomes a real problem.
Right. See, for me, I look at it as a system. And the system, you look, any system has goals and what are we optimizing for, right? Look at the food system. It's optimized to make sure that the most exotic food is available to the richest person at any time. It's not optimized to make sure that we all have adequate nutrition. So the system is driving them to optimize for their own welfare. And they're saying, I need to appeal to people so that I get my funding, my donations. And so they're all trying to make sure that within the current system is optimized. It's a competitive game. Because everyone can go grab according to certain rules as the money flows from the bottom to the top. So it's given in the form of loans from the top down, and then it goes up. And as it goes up, you're trying to grab some of it. So in a system like that, you are only going to get behavior like that. Because they're all trying to optimize their own well-being. We have to create a system in which people are taken care of from the outset. So that's a universal basic income system. Okay? So everyone has to feel like they belong in the system. You belong on earth. Why? Because you're born here. You belong on earth and the community is here to take care of you. So that you feel secure. Now once you feel secure, then you ask, how are you contributing to making earth better? So that creates a system in which you can routinely give more than you take. Today, we all have to routinely take more than we give, otherwise we are going to go bankrupt. So in a system like that, you have to expect behavior like that. So I'm just saying, you cannot take a system that's designed for routinely taking more than you give and turn it into a system that's letting us routinely give more than we take by tweaking things. It is a completely different system we have to create. So I'm appealing to the vegan community and people like that. Let's create our own currency that allows people to routinely give more than they take. So we have to create an entire system around this. So it's a system optimization problem. It's not that hard to do, to create systems like that. And this is us growing up. Until now, we have been suckling on our mother cow. And every infant eventually weans from the mother. As a species, we have to wean from our mother cow and create a system in which she can thrive, we can all thrive together.
You talk about the burning of fossil fuels generates warming gases, but you mentioned cooling gases as well. I've never heard of these cooling gases. Could you tell us more about them, what they are, how they're produced?
Yeah. So every gas that we emit from our processes that stays in the atmosphere is either a cooling gas or a heating gas. So how does that happen? Any complex molecule absorbs electromagnetic radiation in certain frequency bands, and it absorbs it and then it releases it in arbitrary directions. So if it's absorbing energy in the infrared region, it's a warming gas. Why? Because it's then preventing the Earth's energy from going out. Because the Earth is releasing energy in the infrared region. The sun is giving us energy in both the visible region and the infrared region. So when these two energies are in balance, you've reached the equilibrium temperature on Earth. Okay? So every gas, either if it's absorbing electromagnetic radiation in the infrared region, is a warming gas. If it's absorbing electromagnetic radiation in the visible region, it's a cooling gas. Why? Because it will reflect sun's energy back. So we have both. In fact, the IPCC has 6 warming species and 5 cooling species.
Could you name them?
Yeah. The warming species are CO2, methane, nitrous oxide, and black carbon, and halocarbons, and then they call it non-methane volatile organic compounds, plus carbon monoxide. They all have roughly the same band in which they are. So they clump it according to bands. The cooling gases are sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, organic carbon and albedo. Albedo is basically change in reflectivity. So if you just chop down trees, you change the reflectivity. Anyway, sulfur dioxide is the main one. Because sulfur dioxide, when you emit it, it becomes sulfuric acid. It interacts with H2O in the atmosphere, it becomes sulfuric acid. It becomes like fumes. And these fumes reflect sunlight back. And in fact, they are very powerful. And it only lasts in the atmosphere for a few weeks, which means we are constantly replenishing the sulfur dioxide by burning more fossil fuels. In fact, the reason why 2023 and 2024 were the warmest years ever is because the International Maritime Organization put a limit on the sulfur content of fuel that you can burn in the open seas. It used to be 3.5% or less. They made it 0.5% or less, okay, in 2020. When they did that, they calculated that it will only cause an increase in warming on the planet by 0.079 watts per square meter. Less than 0.1 watt. So from 2.6, it may go up to 2.7, they said. So it's negligible, right? That was their calculation. But Hansen wrote a paper this year in February saying it actually caused 0.5 watts per square meter increase because it removed the cooling sulfur dioxide above the ocean. And the ocean has pristine air. So anything that you emit has a much more nonlinear effect, much bigger effect than we thought. So it became an experiment that we did on ourselves when the International Maritime Organization did that ruling. So as a result, the heating on the planet increased by 0.5 watts per square meter, not 0.1 watt per square meter. And when you heat up a planet, when you increase the heating on the planet by that amount, it takes 3 to 4 years for the planet to respond. Because the ocean has huge inertia. The ocean is able to absorb these things, and not increase the temperature much. But 1/3 of the heating, the temperature increase will happen within the first 5 years. Then the next 1/3 will happen within the next 100 years. And the last 1/3 will happen in about 1,000 years because of the inertia of the ocean. This is why the impact of the heating that we have done, we haven't yet fully felt. The ocean has absorbed it. And so there is a lot of extra temperature increase in the pipeline for what we have done. But if we start cooling, then that doesn't even have to happen. That's the good news. This is why the ocean is a friend of ours, Is that clearer? Yeah. Okay. Yes.
You talk about these cooling gases quite fondly.
No, I'm not fond of them at all.
I was wondering what you thought about geoengineering solutions of that sort.
Yes. There are geoengineering solutions where they're planning to pour more sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, burning sulfur. And that is going to cause acid rain everywhere. And the more you do that, the more you're stuck having to keep doing that. Okay? As I said, there is inertia in the ocean, and therefore we have actually put more warming in the pipeline that we haven't experienced yet. So when you have a fire, the first thing you need to do is to douse the fire. Put it out as quickly as possible. So people are proposing more benign geoengineering, like marine cloud brightening, where you take water and you turn it into fine mist and send it up from ships. So that creates marine clouds, low-lying clouds that reflect sunlight back. Okay? Now those are okay because then you'll be cooling, and if you think you're overcooled, you can stop. Right? So I think such geoengineering we have to do, but number one thing we need to do is to go vegan as quickly as possible and restore the planet. Because it's not just climate change. Folks, climate change is only the 4th worst problem. It's not even the worst problem. The worst problem is what we are doing to biodiversity. The second worst is chemical pollution. The third worst is nitrogen and phosphorus loading on the planet. And the fourth is climate change. Then comes land system change, and then freshwater change. So if you want to address all 6 of them, the only way to do it is for us to go vegan as quickly as possible. So it's a changing our mindset, changing our inner makeup, and acknowledging that animals are here with us, not to be exploited. In fact, they are our bosses. Think of it as they are our bosses. We are here to serve them. So I even imagine in the book that we had a genetic code saying serve animals. We thought that meant chop their heads off and cook them and serve them to each other. And now we are waking up to the reality. It really means to serve them. Because we have to beg them to stay on this planet, otherwise they'll go away.
I'm just trying to wonder how we implement this, that's all.
Yeah.
And I think implementing it, it's all very well, everyone loves the idea, but actually changing your 2 lamb chops for, a vegetable curry is a very different proposition for most people.
We could do a vegan day and have potluck at a church. Right? So this way everyone is bringing their vegan food and exchanging recipes and figuring out what tastes good. Yeah? So things like that. I think it has to be a community-led grassroots effort because our governments are all stuck. They are trying to deal with Trump. Yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you for your creativity and your analysis and also your positivity, because that's the thing I find very hard is staying positive. And like you were saying about the comment about being vegan is sort of being seen as being extreme. It makes me think of that joke, how do you know someone's vegan? It's because they'll tell you. But I just wanted to say thank you because I think you're inspiring me, what you said about education. I think our children are being taught completely the wrong thing. They're still taught about this nice little farm with a little cow. And my son is vegan, and he's the one who got me to be vegan. He's 9, and I think I will just arrange a meeting with the head teacher, who I'm quite scared of, and see what she says, because I think we need to, it's sort of grassroots up, isn't it? Teaching the children and maybe getting the school system to implement vegan days or more than that. And also the thing you said about myth busting, I think is really important, because that's the one thing that I get a lot is, oh, you don't get enough protein. And in fact, I decided, okay, I'm going to analyse what my son ate for a day, and in fact, he got more than the requirement that you need just from eating plants. So it was really good to know that. But I don't know what you could say about how we can move through the world and tell people, hang on, the plant's on fire, but not kind of scare them off, and help them see that eating plants is actually a beautiful thing. And whenever I go to the supermarket and I see that wall of meat, it's horrifying. But how do you think what's a good way of being vegan in the world, would you say?
Yeah. You are, when you're vegan, you're extreme on planet A, but you are the norm on planet B. So you're just in the wrong place, with the wrong society, right? But you have to now convince the people who are on planet A that there's a better way to do this. We had a debate about this at the Oxford Union in 2023, November. The proposition was this house would go vegan. And there were 4 speakers for the proposition, 4 against the proposition, and we won. The vegan side won, which means the students at Oxford know that the future is vegan. Why is Oxford University not promoting that? If they know that the future is vegan, why isn't Oxford already vegan? Right? So it's like they're not even listening to their own students. And this is where we need to put our foot down and say, it's unacceptable behavior. You're destroying our planet for what? There's not even a single vegan restaurant here, is there? In a fully vegan restaurant in Oxford. So, education. To me, educational institutions have educated people to create the world we have created. So, they are responsible to educate people to create the world we need. And we need to hold them accountable for that. So, I highly encourage you to go talk to the head teacher and please give her this book. Because it has all the data and she can read it upside down.
Religions, in my opinion, often get in the way, as well as other communities and groups and so on. Thou shalt not kill, halal meat, religious sacrifices of animals, and all of that. How can we overcome such long-term held views on these things?
Yeah, they are long-term held views, and they have brought us to where we are. And they were all created at a time where they probably made sense. So I try to come up with explanations for why they said what they did, why they did what they did. And assuming that there were reasonable people who are saying we need to make sure that everyone has access to some animal foods a few times a year. This is why during festivals you have to make sure that you feed everybody, food made with dairy, ghee, or sacrifice a goat and feed your community. Now these are all meant for making sure that everyone has access to some animal foods some few times a year. And why do I think they did that? I think it's because of vitamin B12. We are the only species that washes its food and eats it. So we don't eat soil. Animals eat soil, and they get their vitamin B12 from the soil they're eating. We don't. And because of that, our ancestors empirically found out that you have to eat some animal foods a few times a year to maintain your vitamin B12 and be healthy. Now we know about vitamin B12. In fact, the soil has been destroyed to a point where now we are feeding vitamin B12 to our cows. So we are giving them supplements. So why do you give them supplements and then eat them? Why don't we eat the supplements ourselves? I'm not suggesting we all start eating soil and dirt. Instead, we can all take a supplement. And we have to now change our routines. So we have to convince our religious people that it's a different world today than what was there when they came up with their rituals and so on. And explain it to them reasonably like this. I think we can convince some of them at least to change. We're going to try. Right? And as some change, others will come along eventually. Because we are creating something new. This is why I want people to think of a planet B mindset. It's a different world you're going to. If we think we are, this is the way it's always been, you're stuck in planet A. So eventually we want to make people to feel like, I want to be in planet B. I don't want to be left behind in planet A.
Well, thank you for a fascinating talk. It really is. I mean, Marlene did a little bit of changing for me, and you've done another little bit of changing for me. The process is slow, but I applaud you and what you do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.